Welcome to part 4 of A Tale of Two Shows, enabling remote theatrical performance during the coronavirus pandemic. We've made it to the performance phase. We've gotten through our goals, we did all our research, we implemented a system, we tested it, we used it through the rehearsal process, we implemented our design, we coordinated with our actors at home. We did our tech rehearsal. Everything is ready to go now for performance. As we mentioned at the end of the last video, before each performance, there is a pre-show set of checks or procedures that need to happen right before the show starts. So that's what we're going to start with here. We're going to discuss those pre-show checks. So the pre-show checks, it's basically an opportunity to, make sure that everything is ready to go. Sound, audio, video, props, whatever needs to happen before a show can be conducted successfully. All of those things we need to make sure that they've taken place, and that's the case for all types of theater, whether it's traditional in-person theater or this remote thing we're doing. We always have things we need to check on to make sure we're ready to go. So a couple things we did to help with this. One is we created sort of a checklist for the actors and a reminder about sort of how they should respond to technical issues. And we made that the screen share of the host Zoom computer so that as the actors joined into our Zoom meeting, they would be met with the reminder about the information that they need about what they need to make sure they've done as they are getting ready for the performance. And then our other checks take place once they've joined the Zoom meeting and gone into their breakout rooms. We essentially go through each actor one by one, and we check on their framing, their lighting, their chroma key, see if anything has changed from the last performance or the last, from the final dress rehearsal or anything. Some of our My Father's Dragon shows did happen at different times of day, so we were getting kind of different lighting issues going on depending on what time it was. We also needed to check their audio, make sure the gain settings in Zoom were still good, adjust the noise gate in vMix if there's any difference in kind of background noises, and then also adjust color correction if there's sort of different coloring going on with the lighting, and it's also an opportunity to try to diagnose last minute any potential connection issues or computer issues if they come up. So in the images we're looking at here, you can see one of the things we did to kind of help with our framing checks is we did these overlays that we put on screen that would help an actor sort of approximately get their camera adjusted back to the position that we had been using it, for prior rehearsals and performances. So if something moved during their setup, from one show to the other, we had a nice framing reference that we could use to make sure they got their camera positioned back in the correct place. To give you a better idea what this process looks like, I'm going to play you a video clip from the pre-show checks of My Father's Dragon. And I'm just going to scrub through it a little bit so you can kind of see what sort of stuff we were doing. Good, thank you. So we just finished an audio check there with one of our actresses, Shannon. We got her video. Jillian. Yep, now we're moving on to the next person. So we're going to check her framing and her green screen and whatnot.
Let's see here.
You'll notice in the top right corner,
framing looks pretty good.
Next to Jillian, that the pre-show video is playing.
Your video looks a little choppy to me. Am I just
of your own voice? Here we're with the next actress, taking a look at her her green screen, seeing how the color key is set up today.
Okay. And do some lines for us.
Last spring, I took one more trip and sailed to the island of Tangerine.
Have the actress deliver some lines.
Well, it just so happens that I missed the boat.
The echo you were hearing was a function of the recording, I believe. It wasn't something we were actually hearing.
I think doing it a little bit.
And then toward the end of pre-show checks, we just get everybody on screen together, make sure they're sitting upright, looking at their cameras, so that we can do any color tweaking or brightness contrast adjustment to try to make sure they're all sort of the same brightness and maybe kind of the same white balance as much as is possible. So that is how kind of the pre-show process goes. We just go through each person one at a time to check everything out, and then do a kind of a group
Good. That looks pretty good. Thank you.
correction, and that's it. And then we go back to our green room pre-show space. So that's the next thing I'm going to show you, what it sort of looks like when everyone's kind of just hanging out right before the show starts and leading right into the start of the show. So that's what this next clip is.
Becca, stand by A2.
A2 standing.
Have a good show, everybody.
Hey, yeah.
Keep that energy high. We the best music.
DJ
Right, Dan?
Toothless says break a leg.
Literally break a leg.
Just think of Michael stuffing his face with spaghetti, singing "I Want to Go Where You Go."
Get motivate me to get through this show and keep chugging.
DJ Khaled.
All right.
Another one.
So they're getting ready to call the
Tell me
next
when.
cue.
Yep. A2. Go.
And you see the cue execution just occurred. We switch to the next slide where our countdown is starting until the start of the show. And in the top left corner, our first scene, our first cue is prepped and ready to go. So Jillian is sitting there waiting for her appearance on camera so she can start. So that just gives you a little look at what it's like in the pre-show environment in vMix, doing the pre-show checks and everything. Which brings us to our actual showtime for My Father's Dragon. So My Father's Dragon was streamed live on YouTube, 6 separate live shows, along with a secondary captioned version of the output video. So we had 2 separate streams going, one captioned, one not. All the live performances were streamed and simultaneously recorded to disk in vMix, all on the mixing computer. Our actors were called about 40 minutes prior to the go time, and I mean overall the show went very well. We'll get into a little more in the reflections shortly, but I mean overall things went quite smoothly. So a recorded version of the show is available to watch on YouTube. You can click on the link here or on the big button here. I'm going to show you a few kind of bonus clips and things here if you don't want to go and check out that. I'm going to scrub through the production video just a little bit so you can kind of see how things turned out. So this is the pre-show.
Well, they started training him to carry passengers around the top.
What in the world is that?
Oh, so you're a Wahoo Bush.
Oh, let me explain. No pain, no gain. Folks should take their cue.
We ate 3 tangerines, making sure to keep all the peels this time.
Juicy.
Juice!
Rhinoceros too busy brushing his tusk?
Wonderful, really wonderful. Let me have the comb and brush and see if I can do it.
Eve.
Please! Blast those fleas! They won't give you a moment's peace!
How?
Please now! Much bigger noise, getting louder every second. He could hear 7 furious tigers.
And we'll hide away from this place's gray.
Oh, what big eyes you have, oh, what...
That just gives you a little taste of some of the scenes if you haven't watched it yet and didn't leave to go check out the finished video. So I'm going to show you a couple other behind the scenes things here from the run of the show. Here's a little video clip. It's going to show you how the studio is set up, and you'll see all the actors' video feeds coming in. The first computer you see here is the live captioning going on. So there's the live captioning computer. We got a backup computer, and then we have all of our individual actor interface laptops, which are receiving video from each actor. And then that's the live stream, and then this is the mixing computer with vMix, which is receiving all the video and compositing it together. And here's another little clip of some green screen work. You can see how the actors are kind of interacting with one another, throwing these tangerines. They're supposed to be throwing their tangerines at Elmer there. And you notice he just got hit by some tangerines. That's because our actor Dan there had some helpers in his room at home who threw tangerines at him, so it would look like the other actors were pelting him with tangerines. And then one other clip I'm going to play you here is a video clip of our stage manager calling cues during the Wahoo song. So you can kind of hear what it sounds like to hear the stage manager calling cues during that song.
Never could sing a high class thing.
Music he never knew, but I can
X5. Go.
Oh, I never could dance because
X6.
when I dance,
Go.
my legs are like bamboo, but I can
X7.
wahoo, wahoo.
Go.
It's just a game from the jungle. You shouted when adventure starts.
It's very good for
X8.
anxious hearts.
Take it away, shrubs.
Go. X9.
But I do
Go.
So that was just a little taste of what it sounds like to hear the stage manager calling cues during the busiest part of the show. And you can see that they were able to achieve pretty fast, successful cue calling and activating during a musical number like that. So on the captioning, just a little more info about it if you're curious. Live captioning was provided by our Director of Creative Media Services, Dave Giese, and he used a live stream studio production switcher, which received NDI video from the network switch in the studio, and then he added on the open captions to the bottom of the video and then streamed it back out to a secondary link. So that's Dave here running the captioning computer for us. And post-production for My Father's Dragon, there actually was a post-production video edit because no single live performance was necessarily devoid enough of technical issues to maybe release as a permanent, product. I mean, I would say they were all probably good enough that we could have, but we sort of went through and combined the best of the recordings we made, and I definitely say take detailed notes about your performances so it's easy to go back and pull the things you want for you to edit together later. So Medea's performance, I'll say performance for purposes of recording, so it wasn't a public performance at the time of recording. Medea was interesting because it was largely rehearsed and programmed as though it would be performed live. I would say we were probably, I don't know, maybe even 85% toward being able to perform it live if we had wanted to. But as we transitioned to a final dress rehearsal, the schedule adjusted to be more TV or film-like so we weren't just doing straight runs, through. We were being more targeted about what we were planning to record and what scenes we were planning to run. One thing we did with Medea in the recording was also we selectively used the secondary recorder in vMix to record raw actor video input. So basically recording that video coming right from the interface laptop with the green screen and everything. So we had that as backup for later compositing in the editing process if we needed it. So the secondary recorder in vMix is pretty useful for that. Our final recording process pretty much began at Final Dress. We started running recorders, with final intentions at Final Dress, and then we had 3 additional days of recording. We had about a 2-week post-production period, which concluded with our publishing of the video on YouTube, which you can watch at this link, or you can click on the big button here. And I'll show you, I'm just going to scrub through some of the show just so you can kind of get an idea for what things looked like in the final product.
Follow these other deaths.
When the dice of our master's fortune roll badly, it touches the heart of good
By night, towards the Bosporus barrier of the treacherous Black Sea.
women of Corinth. I've come out of the house to avoid reproach.
On us, while hostile to me.
No, I beg you by your knees.
Betters, you will be banished for your foolish talk.
Very clever. So you, too, accept me in Athens, at the hearth in your home. So may your desire for children by...
What do you wish of me?
Jason. I was thinking wrongly when I... and the gods.
Oh. How is this most painful sorrow piled onto the rest that gods inflict upon mortals?
Firmly. And the fire after she shook her hair blazed twice as fiercely as before. She fell to the ground, conquered by disaster. Only a parent could recognize her. The shape of her eyes and noble face distorted as blood mixed with fire dripped down from the top of her head.
Woman standing out here. Is she in the house? She's done terrible deeds. Medea! Such boldness is your true nature. They live on, oi moi, as avengers for your head.
That's just a little look at how things turned out with the final product. But if you want to check out the entire show, if you haven't yet, go ahead and click on one of the links here, and you can check out that. So a little more about the post-production process for Medea. So we essentially uploaded our daily recordings with accompanying shooting notes, to OneDrive each day. So they were accessible to Dave, who was doing our editing. And because we were so close to what could have been performed live, the post-production editing was mostly combining scenes, adding titles, credits, transition music, that sort of thing. With the exception of the messenger's monologue in scene 7, which you just saw a little bit of. That scene was entirely composed in the post-production process. So the shadow characters were played by the director and our tech director. They were recorded on green screen in the campus TV studio, and then this scene was completely composed as part of the post-production process. But that was really the only scene that was composed that way outside of vMix. A couple other things about Medea, just to let you know about, if you want to learn a little more about our production of Medea. We did do a talkback with special guests, Diane Rayer and Margarita Rubino. That is available on YouTube at this link. Our production of Medea was also submitted for review with the Region 1 KCACTF Festival, and 3 of our actors were nominated for the Irene Ryan Scholarship auditions. Our stage manager, Katie Lemon, was also nominated for stage management. And then following the production, our director, Kiara Pipino, also presented a faculty convivium talk, Finding Medea, Adapting Live Theater to a Virtual World, featuring a live performance by our actress Kylie Thecka as Medea. So if you're interested in checking out that talk, you can find that at this link as well. So the last part of our performance process was our photo call, including cast and crew photos. So if there's anyone unfamiliar, in live theater, a photo call is done to hold the actors in still positions, so still photos can be taken scene by scene, without getting motion blur and things like that. It's kind of a good idea to do that in the remote context as well, because I think you get better results out of staged screenshots than you would if you were just pausing a video and trying to capture a good pose from a video that is paused. So I think it's still valuable to plan on doing a photo call in the remote context. And I would say it can also be a fun end to the process for the actors, since there isn't really a traditional strike and all that sort of thing. So I think it can be a fun thing for that as well. Particularly when you make it a really live experience in the software, as you're seeing in these photos here. We set up some layouts specifically for the cast. So we did a cast photo, and then we added in in this case the director and the stage manager and the operators, so they could all take a picture together. They can do their fun photos. In My Father's Dragon, we let them all take a picture with the dragon from the storybook. Our two actresses here, Kylie and Deanna, really wanted a photo together, since they've had pictures together in the other shows that they've done together, so we could put them together in their own two-person layout and let them take some screenshots that way. So I think it's just a nice fun way to end the process, and still valuable, because the screenshots I think are better than recordings or than captures of a paused video. If you are going to do this in vMix, definitely set yourself up a snapshot shortcut, so you can just use your keyboard shortcut to take screenshots rapidly, and then your operator and your stage manager can potentially just keep operating cues to go from scene to scene, and you can push the shortcut to take snapshots. So that kind of concludes the performance process itself, and now we're going to move into some reflections about this entire experience, this entire process. And just to be clear, this is, these are my reflections. They're informed by things others have said and other people's experiences as well, but they are not anyone else's experiences or opinions necessarily. These are my views, my reflections based on everything that we've gone through in this process. So the first thing I think we should reflect on is whether we achieved the goals that we set out to at the very beginning of all of this. And for that, I think there's no question whatsoever. I mean, everything that we set out to do, broadcast to an audience, control what's on the screen, keep the actor's side, simple as far as interaction with the system, adding other production elements, enabling the remote control, setting up, means to adapt rapidly to technical problems, and doing it all in an attainable and affordable way. I think there's no question whatsoever that we did all of those things, and maybe even more. On the hardware and network side of things, some reflections. So administrative access is extremely, extremely convenient if you can have administrative privileges on the computers that you're working with. If you don't, or even if you do, also having a very good relationship with your IT people goes a tremendously long way. I can't say enough about the IT support that we received through this whole project, including things like providing administrative access to computers to make it easier for us to do the things that we needed to do. Also, so on the testing side of things, test your system accurately to its limits early. And when I say accurately, I mean test the whole system, pushing it as hard as you ever anticipate pushing it during the performance and use. and that may mean having to run a live stream and a recording at the same time, or do some things that are kind of annoying to have to all do so early in the process, but it's worth testing it and finding out what the problems are early as possible. Some of the tests that I did seemed like I was getting very valuable information, but if I wasn't necessarily always pushing the computers to the point that we really ended up pushing them for My Father's Dragon. One other thing, definitely have more than 1 gigabyte per second available for mixing if you're going to do a setup similar to the one that we did. I was running NDI capture on 10 laptops simultaneously and running, had several NDI feeds enabled in vMix as well. So if you're doing anything similar on that scale, you're definitely going to want to try to have more than 1 gigabyte per second. Back to, kind of pushing hardware to its limits. So I discovered during the final performances of My Father's Dragon that during that show we were really maxing out the CPU on the mixing computer. I mean, we were at when we were streaming and recording and doing everything, we were at 100%, just maxing it out. I have no particular idea why we never really had any kind of significant system performance issues, even though that was occurring. But it was rather concerning when realized it was going on. And a good portion of that CPU usage, probably 15 to 20%, was just coming from Windows Defender, Network Monitor, and Ansibleware. So, I mean, if I had more time and if I was doing it again, I would definitely do more to try to evaluate and see what could be done to reduce the impact of Windows Defender and that stuff more. Even though I did look at it and made sure there were exceptions in place for the software we're using, it still just seemed to really want to monitor the network traffic more so than it really needed to, and it was causing a system usage, resource usage problem. Perhaps we needed a more powerful computer. That would have helped. Also, though, and this probably would have been a good idea to just distribute your recording and streaming tasks to other computers. Like, you don't really need the master mixing computer that's composing everything to also be recording and streaming. Since you have a studio full of NDI network distribution, you could have a secondary computer that all it's doing is recording the NDI, stream, and you could have a separate computer that all it's doing is broadcasting to YouTube, so you could take the load off the system by distributing those tasks more, and I think I probably would have done that if I had realized the extent of this CPU problem earlier. Just in general, be cautious of your hardware limits. Make sure you have plenty of free disk space for recordings. If you're doing a recorded show, you're recording lots of data every day. You could be filling up your hard drive pretty quick. And have sufficient free space for any, system required buffers. There's a certain amount of free space you should have relative to the RAM that your computer has, and you want to make sure that you do have that sufficient space on your hard drive. Reflections on vMix overall: very, very powerful, very customizable for the price point. It got the job done well, I would say. The scripting integration and kind of the triggers and all that stuff, super, super useful, but it definitely requires time and effort. I've even taken I've actually even taken Visual Basic.net and C++ programming and stuff, and I there's more I could have done with the scripts that I wrote, but even with that background, it was still a little, having to try to think back and okay, to my programming days and how can I write a script to do this simple thing that I need to do? Like, you can go down a rabbit hole with scripting pretty rapidly, but hopefully the ones that we did write and have been provided in this presentation will be useful to somebody else. All the good things about vMix, I also, of course, have, a huge list of gripes of things I'd like to see them change or address. And if you're looking at vMix and you want to understand what some of those might be, have a read through of this list. But it's a lot of stuff that I just don't really understand what the need for the limitation is. Some of it is really, would really require a feature upgrade. Some other things I've become more aware of, since using vMix for our shows is other ways of controlling vMix besides just the go buttons in the software. Basically, one of those is the web controller, which is available in vMix. That's part of vMix. It's a way of making like this controller panel available over a network, so you can sort of control it remotely. But I'm not exactly sure how we would have leveraged that in our situation. And there's also a popular piece of hardware called a Stream Deck, which has programmable buttons on it. And when paired with an app called Companion, you can get some pretty nice control over vMix to run queues and things with that. Not sure how that necessarily plays in with remote control, but just some things to look at if you are thinking about vMix. But overall, we came a long way. We did a lot with it for sure. Ever since the very first test of it, we were able to accomplish a lot. On Zoom, so for sure the breakout room functionality worked very, very well. That was extremely convenient. I had briefly toyed around with the idea of starting a separate Zoom meeting for every interface laptop, just to be able to accomplish having HD video on each interface computer. But the amount of work that would have required to start a meeting, transfer hosting, go to the next one, start a meeting, transfer hosting, and have to keep logging into our account and then having a separate meeting link set up for every actor. Like, breakout rooms are just so much easier, and I don't know that it was really worth it. It would have been worth it to try to get that little extra video quality anyway. I think in this format, people don't necessarily expect crystal clear HD video anyway, and that may have taxed students' computers more anyway. So breakout rooms are just very, very convenient. It's such a fast way to divide all the actors to their computers. The way we handled microphone gain in Zoom generally worked out quite well. We didn't let Zoom automatically adjust gain. We set the gain fixed according to the actor's loudest output. And we just had to be careful to make sure when we were setting that, we really had them try the loudest, most strenuous parts of their audio, so we could make sure we weren't going to peak out Zoom. And then any other gain adjustment, or audio manipulation was done in vMix. Some issues we had in Zoom weren't too significant. The devilish distortion on actor audio that we had to deal with, but we mostly dealt with that more in the earlier rehearsal process before more of the actors were running on Ethernet for their internet more of the time. Issues capturing certain types of sounds, high pitch or percussive sounds, or a lot of simultaneous sounds. Issues with the video proportion and zoom when you have HD enabled or not. Like I just mentioned, lack of access to HD video in meetings with more than 3 people. It would be so convenient if they just let HD video work if you were inside of a breakout room with only 2 people, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And the last thing is that when there is a bandwidth problem that's bad enough, it's unfortunate that Zoom really shrinks the size of the video instead of just sort of downsampling it and letting it look worse. They at a certain point it just shrinks it smaller, which is kind of a problem when you're trying to have the video remain sort of fitting in with the rest of the show. Actors at home. So many reflections about actors at home. The first thing, plan out your actor training and provisioning process. It is a process from start to finish of finding out what their capabilities are, making sure they know what to expect, and the training you're going to have to provide them, to allow them to do things at home, especially, a lot of, maybe all of them or a lot of them are not going to be able to get much support from you, in any kind of in-person sense. So just, try to plan out how you're going to go through that training and provisioning process, and so it can go as smoothly as possible. I would also say, supply actors with, as much as you can. I think it makes it easier on everyone, and it's arguably more fair, the more you can send what the actor needs as opposed to relying on the different things that different people have. I think it just ends up being easier on everyone. Like when especially when you're trying to troubleshoot with somebody, knowing that they have this light because we sent it to them and they have this microphone because we sent it to them. It's information that's very valuable that you know exactly what they have because you sent it to them. So and also, more than half of our actors had loaner computers from our college by the time we got to tech. So if I had realized that we were going to end up with that many by tech, and that our college had enough computers for us to provide to all our actors, I probably would have just arranged for that right from the beginning. Everyone's getting a laptop supplied by the college. That probably would have just been easier. So if you have the ability to just provision all your computers or all your devices as well, definitely do that. Lighting adjustments are particularly a challenge with actors at home. Getting actors, especially students, to kind of understand what the issue is about the placement of a light and how to move it and how to adjust it and things. It's not that it can't be done. It's just it's time consuming, and sometimes not successful. So use caution in your designing and building, particularly with props and costumes that are very bright or reflective. We had that problem with Medea with the masks initially. And part of it is not just light reflecting back at the camera, but when actors change the direction that they're facing, that changes the amount of light that's bouncing back. And these cheap webcams in laptops and stuff, the exposure starts, the exposure compensation starts going crazy. So every time the actor turns their head and back, the color or the brightness of the scene is just changing a lot. So the more you can try to prepare for, prepare your costumes and your props and things to try to, not promote reflectivity and bounce back and stuff. It's just going to make a huge difference. And I will say, do not hope in any way to solve any problems via the webcam settings on a computer or somebody's device, because my experience is basically non-existent in terms of options that you can try to adjust. I mean, unless someone has an external webcam that came with some kind of, manufacturer provided software to adjust the exposure and things. Like, it just is not a normal feature of Windows, and is even less a feature of a Mac to be able to make those kinds of adjustments to the webcam settings, for all applications to use. So just don't. I wouldn't even try to solve a problem that way, really, unless you want to install third-party software to do that. And also be cautious with lighting adjustments and different times of day. For My Father's Dragon, we were performing at different times of day, and the show we had at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we were dealing with lighting issues with sunlight coming through people's windows in a way that we never had at any other performance or rehearsal or anything. So and it was causing some issues. We get sunlight spilling on someone's green screen all of a sudden, and it was preventing the green screen from being replaced. So avoid devices running Chrome OS. Just don't even use them. Zoom is not very well supported on Chrome OS. It has very limited options in there. I would just stick with, the two big operating systems. Stay away from Chrome OS. Some other things, the actors at home. Overall, I think it was definitely worthwhile to go through the effort to get actors connected to their Ethernet. I think overall, our connections and the quality and reliability of our connections increased across the board, as actors were able to connect via Ethernet. I can't say for sure how many of them were definitely connected that way, because there's really no way to, to test them on that and check and make sure they are doing it. But, as far as responding to, seeing issues, we weren't having problems. So we did have a couple odd situations where we were having slower speed on Ethernet than on Wi-Fi. One of our operators, for a vMix, remote operator of vMix, she was having all kinds of video lag problems, and she would click the go button, which there'd be no lag on whatsoever, and then she wouldn't see the cue change on her screen for another 5 seconds or something. And we discovered after that rehearsal, by running a speed test with speedtest.net, that her download speed was practically 0. And when she switched to Wi-Fi, she was back up at a normal download speed, and it worked fine. So it was just some odd situation of possibly a home router or modem or a bad Ethernet cable, but just look out for that. Tablet and external camera positioning is more difficult than laptops. Tablets are more difficult because they're typically they're typically leaning back on a stand of some kind. They don't have those sort of solid hinges of a laptop to adjust at any angle you want. And if you need to tip the camera down, you're going to reach a point where the tablet just wants to fall over forward toward the actor. So tablets are a little bit annoying in that regard. External cameras are also difficult. We had one actor who was able to actually put their external camera on a tripod, which was convenient, and they were able to move the tripod closer to themselves so that we could get the proper display of their green screen behind them. Another actor had a web camera that was mounted on top of a computer monitor, and some webcams don't have great stands or clamps or mounting options, and getting it into a good position is difficult. So depending on the external camera, it can sort of be helpful, like if you can put it on a tripod or mount it to something that you can move around easily, but it can also be kind of a problem. We only had a few mic or speaker echo problems. So we had sent all the actors one of those surveillance earpieces, and we only had one actor who was on, I think, a Microsoft Surface that we were having an echo problem with the external microphone, and he did wear one of the earpieces, I believe, throughout the entire process. That solved our echo problem. I had a second actor wear the earpiece only because they had a desktop computer and didn't have any external speakers for it. They normally used headphones, so they wore the earpiece to get their sound. And then we developed an echo problem with Dan, seen here and with his home setup. We started having an echo problem with him, but he's the one actor in all the shows who could not wear an earpiece because he was standing up the whole time, running in place, moving around quite a lot. So it would have been very hard to wear an earpiece unless it was wireless. And for him, we were able to just connect an external speaker and just position it, further away from his microphone, down on the floor, get it out of the pathway, the reflection pathway of the microphone, and that solved the problem, no problem. So, for solving an echo problem, number one, have them reduce their speaker volume to where they can just hear sufficiently everything they need to. If that doesn't solve it, and you don't want them to wear headphones or an earpiece, try an external speaker if they have one, because it's much easier to move a speaker around. You have more flexibility in where a speaker can go than where a microphone can go. And then if you really have to, you can go to an earpiece or a headphone or something if you just can't get rid of the echo issues. Then pre-tech consults, so those video meetings we did with our actors before tech were, I think, highly valuable. Definitely should be done about a week before Q to Q starts if you can. The scheduling of those is really tricky because it's like you're trying to wait as long as you can to ship things to the actors so you can finish the costumes and the props and all that stuff. And then when they get it, you want to give the actors enough time to get their setups together, which I would say, practically speaking, you want to be giving them at least a few days, and then do a pre-tech consultation with them to check on their setup with enough time before Q to Q that you have time to address a problem if you have to send them something else or replace something you sent them or whatever it is. So, but overall, they're extremely valuable. I don't know how we would have been much less successful, I think, in our technical rehearsal and Q to Q process if we hadn't gone through and done those meetings and those checks with each individual actor before we started that process. So, and I will also say, it is much more difficult to find time to address issues once your technical rehearsal process has begun, just because things are so busy and crazy in the technical rehearsal process. Like if you had to try to find a time to deal with an issue with every single actor as your Q to Q or as your tech rehearsal process is going on, like it gets more difficult, I think, to try to schedule those things once tech rehearsal has started. So the more you can prep yourself to try to prevent having to do a lot of follow-up consultations or meetings or things after tech rehearsal has started, I think the better. On the microphone and the lights that we used, just some observations here if you're interested in the specific products we use. There's the listings and the prices. Really, not expensive stuff, but it got the job done. The microphone was definitely more directional. We didn't get as much ambient noise, but I would not describe it as high quality sound at all. The frequency response wasn't really that great. It was very mid-range heavy, but fortunately we could use vMix. Since we had isolated audio from every actor, we could use vMix to custom EQ to try to get a more natural sound, in the studio from a pretty low quality microphone. We did get some issues with electronic kind of background noise with some actors, but I'm not sure if that was really due to the microphone in any way, but noise gates worked very well in vMix. If you're having any kind of background staticky electronic, fan noise, I mean, ideally actors are not running like fans or things that are going to blow air, toward or across their microphones. Be careful with the microphone placement, actually, even on the air vents on a laptop. If your mic is in the wrong spot, an external microphone, that air coming out of the laptop vents is enough to create noise in the microphone. So, but if you really can't figure out another way to get rid of it, using a noise gate in vMix worked really well. So anytime that actor wasn't speaking, it just kept their microphone from, continuing to introduce noise into the soundscape. So the LED lights we used were, they worked well enough. It's, a pretty. There's a lot of options for lights in this type and whatnot. We tend to use them in the 50 to 100% range. These ones came with 10 levels of brightness, and we always use them in the white light setting where all the LEDs were on. One thing I was a little worried about with these is be cautious, because some of these do not come with power adapters, because a lot of them are USB. So you can use a regular like cell phone, USB charger, or you can plug them into your computer. And fortunately, all of our actors were able to, devise a solution to power their lights, whether it was off their computer or using an extra cell phone adapter. But the ones we ordered did not come with power adapters, so it was sort of left to them to make that power connection of their light. Not necessarily ideal, but it worked out just fine. Moving on to the design phase of the project and the use of the system. The first thing I would say is definitely, consider what your labor needs are, how your traditional theater designers fit into what the show in this format calls for, and whether they're really up for it or not, because, not everyone is necessarily going to be. Not everyone is going to feel comfortable, working in this format relative to a traditional theater format, or may not feel that they have the expertise that they need in order to do it successfully. So, really consider those questions at the beginning of the process and determine, what is doable with the labor that you have and what additional expertise might be needed, in order to design in this format, using the tools that are available in this format. The next one would be, storyboard as early in the process as possible. As early in the process as you can. Storyboard out the show. What are you going to put on screen when? What are the backgrounds going to be? How is the screen going to be laid out? How are you going to transition between scenes? Like, a lot of this can be explored and storyboarded out before you even audition. If it can be all part of a pre-production process. And the earlier you can do it, and everybody kind of get on the same page about what it is you're going for, the better. It was particularly challenging, for us, because we were developing a system at the same time. We're trying to determine what to do design-wise with each show, so not entirely clear yet on what the system could do. Is certainly not the ideal way to go about it. For sure. So, storyboard as early as you can. And hopefully this presentation has, helped you understand better what's possible with these kinds of broadcast software and these systems, and, what can be achieved. So, one note about, something specific. We found that you could achieve sort of a more cohesive aesthetic or quality by matching the resolution and quality of your digital backgrounds with other elements, with the actor's video, because the actor's video in our experience, kind of it's the lowest quality aspect in terms of resolution, especially if you're not getting HD video from your video conferencing application. So for us, it worked well to reduce the sharpness of our backgrounds and add some noise, like with dust and scratches in Photoshop. It just helped the background feel of a similar quality to the quality of the video that of the actors. Maybe that you want a really contrasting aesthetic where your background is super sharp and high res and your actors are not, but for us we kind of it worked well for things to kind of blend with each other in that way. And then the method of using the foreground shaders in vMix worked very well for modifying the color of our scenes. So we reserved a foreground layer in every one of our scenes that just had that very light tint, solid color applied to it, and we could shift that color and recolor our scenes very nicely that way. So that's a good technique for doing that. On the use of green screen, so green screen is very challenging, but it definitely added, I think, to the audience and the actor experience. I think it makes things a little more dynamic and interesting for the audience, but it also, seeing the actors get excited about what is possible when you start, doing green screen replacements and then moving them around the screen and letting them overlap with each other and things like, the actors really get kind of excited and empowered by that, and to explore what they can do with it. So I think it can add a lot to the experience. It definitely expands your capabilities greatly in terms of what you can do with the screen, because using a green screen effectively, it effectively eliminates the borders, on the video. You're not seeing any of those borders anymore, really, except for the border across the bottom. So it expands your design capabilities a lot. Conduct tests very early, though. Green items aren't the only potential issue. We were finding issues with bright yellow objects, like Elmer's backpack here. Not that it was necessarily especially reflective in real life, but just the bright yellow color seemed to, we're having problems with it. Also with green objects, obviously if you really need to use green objects and you're using green screens, you're going to have issues there. If you really need green costumes or props, maybe think about using a blue screen or a different color that's not going to appear in the costuming or in the props or, whatever it is. So just another thought. Try to make decisions about layering and blocking, again, early. This is what we just said, storyboard as early as possible. If you're going to use green screen, how are you going to use green screen? And since it does expand the capabilities so much, again, storyboarding it out, since it sort of makes your canvas even bigger, of the canvas of possibilities, explore that, starting as early as you can. And I also would say use the broadcast system as much as you possibly can, because, unfortunately, blocking in regular video conferencing is quite restrictive compared to a broadcast system where, you're doing green screen replacement and everything. Though, there's trade-offs everywhere, because even if you have a broadcast system that you can use for every rehearsal, the question is, when can you actually provide green screens and expect actors to get their home setups all up in a way that allows you to, start doing green screen replacement, and how early do you want to start doing green screen replacement? So there's odd pressures here, I think, to sort of have production elements in place earlier than we would necessarily plan on in a live production, and that's because of the way in which they're tied to the very stage itself that the actors are standing on. Being in regular video conferencing is kind of like, I would say it's kind of like being in a rehearsal room where the scenery isn't spiked at all on the floor, and what's more, the rectangles are spiked on the floor, and the actors aren't allowed to leave them. That's very different from walking into, say, the broadcast system with all the green screen in place, where now it's like, oh, look, you can go wherever you want. We can put you wherever you want. We can change your size. Like, we can, you go from literally being able to do nothing to being able to do, like, everything. It's quite a contrast. So, keep weigh all of those things as you're deciding on how you want to proceed with green screen or not. Issues with camera color rendering, ran into this with several actors where their cameras and their devices, for whatever reason, just would not capture and render the green screen in the natural color or anywhere near the natural color that it was, where it looked desaturated, more gray, more olive, just something that was causing problems with us trying to process it. So, in our case, we were fortunately, for 2 actors, able to replace their device with a loaner computer, which stopped the problem from occurring. But if you're in a last-ditch situation, another thing you can try is to use the video conferencing program's, virtual background feature to have the actor insert a digital green screen. So say in Zoom, you go to your virtual backgrounds, you tell Zoom, hey, I have a green screen on the wall behind me, but then for your background, you choose an image file that is also a green screen, and you let Zoom try to do the digital, replacement of the background with a new green screen that you can then chroma key out in your software. So that it would be a workaround if you were really in a last-ditch situation, and it would be, something to try if you're not having good results and you're kind of backed into a corner. It might work for you. So this is on presenting items to the camera. I think I kind of put this in here, one, because we had one particular show element that was affected by this, but also because I think, we're used to scaling things and sizing things for stage distances, which, depending on the theater you're in, might be 10 or 20 feet, but it could be, 100 or more feet away. That something needs to be visible and recognizable. And that kind of shifts a lot when now you're talking about performing to a web camera. So it's just something to kind of think about. Definitely play around with a real web camera and with scaling and things, and see, what is possible, what is going to work or what isn't. Including the effect that lighting has on things. So, as the example from our show, the big one was, the initial hope was that the actors in their arrangement on screen would be able to take a piece of a dragon. Each one of these is a separate board that was sent to each actor, that they would be able to hold them up to the camera to compose the dragon as one creature, each of them playing their part to create the dragon. And, it basically turned out that just there was too much difficulty with that precise blind alignment of things to the camera, and also issues with the variations in lighting, and depending on where where the actor has a light located, you could be getting bright reflections, or not, causing things to look very different. Which is a caution, I think, against sending anything that is going to be subject to different lighting in different rooms. If you didn't do green screen, green screen allows you to get a very consistent result because the same, you can apply the same image to everyone's video feed. But if you sent, say, a painted backdrop to every actor, and they hung it up on the wall behind themselves in the environment that they're in, all with different lighting, all those backgrounds are going to come through on video looking different from one another. Even if they all are completely identical, we're all painted in the same shop right next to each other, like they're probably not going to all look the same once they're on the actor's end, which is an advantage to doing a green screen background. They're probably gonna look more consistent that way. So similarly for the dragon, fortunately our designer John Bagby had taken a photo of the pieces all laid out, on his floor at home, and because we didn't have these pieces anymore, they were all at the actors' homes. We were able to take that and do some Photoshop work on it and bring it into the show as a graphical element, and then place the actors in the scene. And it worked out. It worked out very, very well that way. So fortunately, we could just transfer this design and this layout into this format, for the show. So, keep that in mind if you're thinking about things that require, showing things to the camera in very particular ways. Think about how forgiving or not it is, depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. So singing and the playing of instruments through a remote performance system. So definitely take a look at our Wahoo song and the finale from our production of My Father's Dragon. These are links to our YouTube video of the show. It'll take you right to the time in the video to check it out. In general, what I would say based on what I saw of what the actors were able to achieve is that a cappella can kind of work live in this format. I don't think they would have been able to sing to music or a click track live in any way because the delays involved. They'd all be receiving that at different times, and then all their audio would be coming back at different times. There's just not really, physics and technology just don't allow that to work. But a cappella is close enough to traditional speech that it can actually work. And I think the other thing that was interesting is that asynchronous singing, that's sort of introduced by the delays of the technology, can actually kind of work life like a musical round or a perpetual canon, like in Row, Row, Row Your Boat. It almost comes through like it's a little bit intentional. So I think depending on how sensitive you are to, what you consider to be sufficiently musical or not, I think it can actually work pretty well to do singing in an a cappella way. I think where it gets more difficult and isn't as successful is when there is a lot of simultaneous things going on, when you're sort of going from one person singing a solo or a line to another person, where we start to have more issues, I think, is when there's many concurrent things going on. There starts to be problem with all those sounds coming through. And we were noticing that with high-pitched singing in particular. There were a lot of solos that didn't want to come through consistently without there being some kind of dropout. Percussive sounds didn't want to come through at all. I mean, the cowbell especially. We tested that in tech rehearsal with no other sound, nobody making any other sound whatsoever, no noise gates, nothing, and Zoom just doesn't like it, won't let it through. And like I said, many concurrent sounds is also an issue. So like in this scene where they're all doing different things, kazoos, slide whistle, maracas, cowbell, we're not hearing the maracas, we're not hearing the cowbell, we're hearing the kazoos. Sometimes the slide whistle comes through unabated, sometimes it doesn't. We're not really hearing, the percussive sounds, on the mouth and stuff. So it's hard to get all those different sounds and instruments coming through together. So, but I think if you plan for the limitations and you work within them, it can actually be pretty successful. And I think in general we were pretty successful with the musical, the way we did the musical things that we did in that show. On the technical rehearsal process, so again, you may need to make adjustments to your remote system configuration, to your Zoom breakout rooms, your video or audio routing. Like you may have to make some adjustments to that to meet everyone's needs in the Q2Q and tech rehearsal context, because that is different than performance and it's different than regular rehearsal. So make sure you think through that before you get into Q2Q, and make sure you test it before Q2Q. Our first Q2Q, I thought I had a plan sorted out for how to route audio, to the designers, and then we were having problems with it like right away, and had to shift gears and do something different. So make sure that you're not only thinking about the performance phase, but you're also thinking about how you're going to adjust your configuration to meet all those needs during tech rehearsal. One thing with Q2Q and I guess Q2Q specifically, but depending on the nature of the prior planning and the use of the system through the rehearsal process, how early you're able to storyboard or not, you may find yourself making more blocking adjustments during Q2Q than you normally would. Especially if you're integrating green screen use, and you're really bringing it all together right at Q2Q. Suddenly there may be capabilities now that the actors have that they didn't have before. So there may be more time that may be needed for blocking adjustments and letting the actors see, okay, this is how I interact with the person next to me, and things like that, because now I can reach across my space in a way that I couldn't before. So just depending on your process and how things go, you may be there may be possibility of making more adjustments in the Q2Q than we would normally like to do, for sure. I mean, there are normally some blocking adjustments in Q2Q, but it's usually stand a little over here, stand a little over there. It's not, oh, now you can do this whole thing that you couldn't do before. So the control room microphone for the control room operator of vMix, if you don't have an inline mute button on your microphone, I definitely recommend setting up a vMix keyboard shortcut for muting of the control room microphone, because you want to avoid taking the mouse from the operator of vMix, the remote operator, as much as possible. So if there are some functions you can do with the keyboard, like muting and unmuting your own microphone. And also, we actually set up a shortcut to trigger this hold please. So there was a keyboard shortcut for that. So the remote operator could have gone in vMix and clicked on a tile that would activate the hold, but the time it would have taken her to do that, it was kind of easier for me to just have a keyboard shortcut, and if the stage manager called hold, I just pushed the button on the keyboard and that started the hold, and then pushed it again when she said, when she asked them to continue. Unfortunately, keyboard shortcuts don't go through Zoom screen control. Like it didn't matter what the operator did with her keyboard. Zoom did not recognize keyboard commands. So something to keep in mind there. And one last thing about tech rehearsal, the director did like hearing cue calls, since they were ultimately grading the stage manager for their course credit, for their essentially doing the performance as a class. And I think in this context, it's possible that directors may have an opportunity to hear more of the cue calling process than they may during a normal tech rehearsal process. A lot of time the director is in close proximity to the to the tech table during cue to cue to be able to communicate with the stage manager and things. At least in our context, they're not usually wearing a headset, and then they tend to drift away from the table after cue to cue. So in this context, they were actually able to hear more of all of the cue calling through the whole process. So, and they particularly liked being able to hear that. Reflections on recording versus performing live. So live definitely feels more like a live, like a theater performance, for sure, because it is live. There's an audience on the other end that is watching what you are doing in the moment, but it is a lot more complicated and stressful to execute, for sure. If you can get it to happen, it can be very fulfilling, but it is definitely a challenge. The questions I would say should be asked if you are thinking of doing something live is, what are the motivations and the objectives for it being live? How many times are you going to perform it live? Do you have, like the marketing and the access management support available, to control access to multiple live performances? Are there going to be any interactive qualities to the live show that you're doing? Because that's something that sort of makes a live performance unique for an audience member as opposed to just going and watching something that's pre-recorded. And also, are you going to be providing live captioning? Is another question. Be prepared to respond to live technical issues. The issues are more immediate, and try to be as prepared as you can for things that might come up especially in terms of internet connection issues. On the recording side of things, are you recording in one take or are you recording for post-production editing? Because there's a pretty big difference between those two things. If you're recording in one take, you're kind of preparing the show almost like you were going to record it live, because you're just going to perform the whole thing in one take and record it. But if you're really only recording it for post-production editing, then it makes more sense to do it in more of a cinema film type schedule that is totally disjointed and broken up to make it as efficient and the best use of everyone's time as possible. But that does feel even less like theater than at least rehearsing it and recording it in one take, which is kind of what we did through most of Medea, was with the intention of one take, but then we sort of shifted gears right at the end a little bit. Determine whether and how you want to adopt a television film style shooting schedule. That's what I was just saying. So, and then lastly, take notes about all issues as they occur and file them with the recordings. And that's whether you are doing a live show and recording it, or you're doing a recorded performance. If you are recording, have somebody taking notes about issues that occur and when they occur, which runs are better than others, etc. It's way better use of your time to have those things written down than to have to go back and try to figure out what issues there were with recordings. And you're more likely to miss things if you do that. You may think, oh, this run was good, and then you don't notice until you're in your final edit or you've even published that, oh, there was a problem like right in this spot in that take that we didn't know about, we didn't happen to watch it all the way through and catch that issue when we watched it all the way through, in proofing. So, take notes. Just take notes. Live performance emergencies. So problems we encountered, really we didn't have any major problems. We had Zoom stopped recognizing a microphone at one point, so we had some lines lost there, but actors were able to correct and keep going. Otherwise, minor and momentary audio dips or video glitches. No major connection issues, no major bandwidth reductions. We were having one kind of internet issue with an actor that we tested out a little before during a pre-show. She connected to Wi-Fi and back to Ethernet. We ran a speed test just to see what was going on, and things seemed to be okay. So we never had to use our video mutes, but they still were very useful to kind of shut off actor video while we were waiting for them to join the Zoom meeting, because otherwise this happens. Like vMix is, Zoom will default to showing your own video on screen if there's no one else there, so it just turns into this crazy nested video thing. So if you can mute people, it's convenient. And we never used private on-screen messaging during any of our live shows. I did use it in the rehearsal process to let actors know of an audio distortion problem, but other than that, did not use private on-screen messaging during an actual live performance. And I think, except for the kind of audio distortion problem, any significant problem would be best served or best resolved by the stage manager actually talking verbally to the actors. If there was a major stopped show situation going on where the actors needed guidance from stage manager, them just going on the mic and talking to the actors only, preferably, where the audience can't necessarily hear, I think would probably be a better resolution. So, repetitive performance. So actors were very good about maintaining their performance setups between repetitive shows. I definitely say, try to conduct your pre-show checks as efficiently as you can. It's kind of tough because you need to. It's best to check these things with every actor, but it can also take a while if you're trying to resolve problems or whatnot. So try to be as efficient with that process as you can. One thing I would note is, especially with the use of green screen, blocking can slip in this format. Providing refreshers about, general framing and maybe even framing in specific scenes, it might be helpful. Schedule refreshers if you need to. During the tech rehearsal process, we scheduled a session with our lead actor here, Dan, in the middle, and all we did was just step through each cue without the other actors. We just had their screenshots in, just so he could test his spatial awareness and how he interacts with the other, how he moves around his space. So if you need to do something like that, do it. There's also ways to introduce framing reminders into the actual course of your cues. There's ways to, say, show the next upcoming cue to the actors instead of only the current scene. You could show them a preview of the next cue, which might be helpful for actors to sort of frame themselves or position themselves in preparation for the next cue. And the last thing I would say is, just try to keep the process as fun and light as you can. I think it's possible to take a pretty dark view of having to do all of this, remote performance stuff in the first place, and so I think anything that can help sort of compensate for that, is a good thing, to try to keep the process fun and light and not feel like too much of a chore, especially when you're doing repetitive, remote performances. If you're performing the same show, in this case we did 6 times, so trying to keep it a positive experience for everybody is good. The acting experience is a whole thing in itself. It's difficult. I think actors are definitely saturated by the pressures of having to wear many different hats to be their lighting person and tend all their own props and do all kinds of things that we would never expect them to do if they were in our theater, with all of our tech crew and everything. We would never expect them to do all the things that they're having to think about and do at home. I think many actors value seeing themselves in context, so sending video back to them that shows themselves with the other actors in the scene and everything. I think a lot of actors value being able to see that so they can see how they are interacting with with others on screen and with other elements on screen. But I can also see how some actors may not really value that. They don't want to be looking at themselves. They would rather just be focusing on the other actor. So for actors that may be more on that side of things, this is not necessarily a great format for them to be working in. Another big one is both director and actor feelings of becoming secondary to the technology due to both the inherent limitations of it in this format and also to the newness the first time you're trying to implement it. It's like any time in a show where you're trying to implement something that's totally new that you don't have experience with. At a certain point, it may feel like that thing is starting to come to dominate everything else about the show, because so much time is required to try to figure it out. So, and I think a lot of this really does have a lot to do with the perception of signal transmission delays and how it affects how freely actors are able to speak. Having to really speak almost on top of each other in order to keep lines tight, that's not a very natural way for the performer to perform. That said, they did an amazing job at it overall. They really did. It was impressive for sure. They were able to do it. But it's certainly not what I would, like them to have to do, for sure. And maybe some of this plays into, how you might decide to configure your system. Maybe if you're doing something that's all recorded, maybe it makes more sense to try to keep them all in the same video meeting with each other and not expose them in any way to video being sent back to themselves. If you want to try to prioritize not having any perception of any additional delay or of just the delay in general. I don't really have good answer about that. There's so much that goes into it. It's I don't really have a good answer about that. I mean, clearly they were able to perform and do it the way we had the system set up, but depending on what your objectives are, whether it's recorded or live, and what kind of video quality you're looking for, and all sorts of things, maybe you configure your system differently to try to address these issues differently. And then the last one, of course, is directing action away from the camera or the video monitor is quite challenging. You're getting into this weather person effect. The weather person on the news, always has a monitor off to their side so that when they look away from the camera, they can see how they are interacting with the map. And trying to provide some kind of secondary or external monitor for actors in order for them to be able to see how they're interacting while not looking at the camera. That's a whole other set of technical problems to try to implement. And even if you did, there's no guarantee that the monitor would be placed in a location that they would always need to be looking. They need to be able to direct their attention in all sorts of different directions depending on how the screen is laid out. So I think the biggest takeaway I would take from it is, recommending more for actors to maybe give themselves targets to look at and to take the time to establish targets, possibly even, in the Q to Q or some phase of the process to, have actors establish their line of sight, for important things, and have them put a piece of tape on the wall or something that gives them a target to look at, so that they will direct their attention in a natural way, when performing. Almost done here. So remote cue calling and control. Overall, this worked really, really well. The screen share in Zoom wasn't a particularly pleasant way to watch the show due to kind of video lag and jitter. But they were mostly relying on what they were hearing and not what they were seeing. As long as they could see that the cue had activated, that was the most important thing. But director and designers should not watch the show through the screen share of your broadcast software. It's definitely not a good place to be trying to assess the show from. Zoom does have an option called Optimize Screen Share for video clip when you do screen sharing. We did not enable that, and I can't recall. I don't know that it would have. It optimizes like the something about the bit rate when a video is being played back, but I don't know that that would have helped us at all, because I don't know how that all the stuff going on in the vMix display, all the little preview videos, everything moving, I don't know that Zoom would have recognized that as some kind of video being played back. So I don't know if that would have helped us or not, but it would have been worth trying. I never even noticed the option existed in the Zoom screen share until literally we were done with everything. So like I said, audio transmission and mouse clicks never lagged through Zoom screen share and control. So, and we only really ever had one unintended cue execution when we were passing control back from myself to an operator, and when they clicked the mouse to resume control, that somehow activated a cue. And there isn't really a back button in vMix. We didn't have a back button set up, so that was a little bit annoying. But otherwise, our take control procedures work very well. So if I had to fix something, or I needed the mouse, of the mixing computer, I would just tell the operator, I have control for a second. You'll make whatever adjustment, and then I would say, you have control. Just pass the control back and forth. We never had any issues at all with Facebook Messenger. It was always stable for our audio call for controlling. And lastly, our stage management and operator teams did a really awesome job. So Belle and Rebecca on My Father's Dragon, and Katie and Riley on Medea, they really did a great job controlling, calling cues, making everything happen, not even being anywhere near our studio. So nice job, girls. Some final thoughts as we wrap this up. So number one, which I feel like we're saying, always, no matter how we are doing shows, if you can, give yourself more time. And, in this remote context, give yourself more time in all phases of the schedule than you think you're going to need, especially if it's your first go at doing a remote performance. Like, the time is going to go by fast. Things that you meant to resolve in week 2, next thing you know, it's going to be week 5, and you still haven't done it or figured it out yet. So just give yourself as much time as you can. Start implementing and testing in things as early as you can in the process. So this whole remote performance thing, it's an unchosen pursuit. Like, none of us in live theater have really, we did not choose to move to this format, but I think it's one that does still have value. I think it is helping us, sort of get through all of this, but I think it's also expanding the landscape of possibility for future theater projects, both in the sense of our comfort of even the idea of hey, bringing in a remote actor to integrate into a live performance, somebody who's maybe not anywhere nearby, maybe in another state or whatever. Like the idea of integrating that into a live performance, a traditional live performance in the future, I think is very interesting. And also, I think all of learning and implementing this technology is also useful for doing effects, offstage effects in shows like the Oz and Wizard of Oz. You could have a remote actor off stage, performing to a camera and be projecting Oz up onto the screen, or whatever it is. But it's a means of doing that sort of kind of unusual integrating remote elements into live theater. And I would think, and I would hope that there might continue to be some format for live, whether it's live or not, but remote performance in some context, because I feel like there's still value to it, even if you don't have to do it. Like the ability for actors to collaborate across such distances and places and cultures and things. I think there's still a lot of opportunity to continue to pursue remote performance in addition to what we normally do. I think bottom line, let us be thankful for the theater that we can make. I think we should all be thankful for the technology that we do have at our fingertips and what we're able to do with it, as opposed to kind of being completely disconnected from each other in having to deal with all this. So I'm definitely thankful for that, and think we should all be thankful for that. And the very last thing, let us continue to share our successes and our failures in this format, to help one another with it. There's my email address. I can be reached with questions about anything throughout this whole presentation. The last slide of this presentation has some other resources that you can refer to as well. And I think us sharing our experience just helps us all accomplish what we're trying to and keep moving forward. So let's keep doing that. Lastly, I'd like to close things out here with some acknowledgments of all the people that were involved in our shows this semester, as well as in this remote performance system implementation and use. So I'm just going to go through and have a look at our credits. We'll start with our credits from our production of Medea. This is our cast in our production of Medea, and also the translator of the script that we used is mentioned here, Diane Rayer, who was involved in our talkback for Medea. This is the production team from Medea. Some special thanks, people that contributed to Medea. These are the credits from My Father's Dragon. This is our cast. And then this is our production team for My Father's Dragon. Production team, special thanks continued for My Father's Dragon. And then some special thanks regarding our remote performance system project. So Steve Maniscalco, Chief Information Officer for the college, provided us our Zoom license and was involved in some of our software acquisition. Leslie Bidwell, Director of the IT Networking and Telecom, for providing her department support staff to support this project. Mark English, Technology Services Manager, he configured and provided our actor interface laptops and cabling we needed, provided external monitors for the mixing computer, provided laptop and monitor for our one of our ASM operators. So Mark has been an invaluable resource for this project from the very start. Damon Madison, Network Support Specialist, he configured and provided our network switch, arguably one of the most important pieces of hardware we needed to make this whole thing happen, and also got us connected to the outside internet also absolutely critical. He was involved in our the upgrade, bandwidth upgrade of our mixing computer as well. So thank you, Damon, for all of your help. Dave Giese, he's the Director of Creative Media Services, so that's also in charge of our television studio on campus and oversees the studio. So he provided a lot of broadcast video expertise for us throughout the entire process, helped with testing of the system. He did our live captioning, prepared our YouTube streams for My Father's Dragon, and he did the post-production editing for Medea as well. Then Lisa Miller, Director of Marketing, and Jared Stanley, Digital Media Producer, were both involved in getting our productions onto the college YouTube channel. So Lisa provided permission for that, and Jared got our videos uploaded, and also helped us with testing of our system early on when we got it implemented. Logan Hazard, ITS customer support. So he prepared and provided many of the loaner computers for our remote actors. And along with Anthony Beltucci, he helped make our bandwidth upgrade to our mixing computer. So thank you, Logan, for all of your assistance and for having a computer ready for me so rapidly the many times I called you needing a laptop as soon as possible. Anthony Beltucci, Computer Lab Systems admin, so he helped Logan out expanding the bandwidth capability of the mixing computer. He actually loaned us the network card that we needed to upgrade the computer. And Scott Seeger, he's the technical director for our theater department, so he conducted all the purchasing for things needed for the remote performance system and for the shows, so any materials and equipment needed. He helped with testing throughout the process, and then he also managed all the provisioning and shipping of equipment to actors at home, which was a whole project in itself, getting equipment together and packaged and sent and all of that stuff. And then, of course, he also acted in Medea as one of the shadow characters in the messenger monologue scene in scene 7. So thank you, Scott, and thank you to everyone I just named for helping us with this remote performance project. If there's any further questions you have, my contact information is here. More information about our theater department is down in the bottom right here. Documents can be downloaded here. Some other discussion forums applicable to this type of work are down in the bottom left here. A couple of Facebook groups. USITT Technical Production Solutions Forum is a Google group. Controlbooth.com. There's a couple other organizations that I've noticed in tech theater educators that are using vMix in a similar manner to the way that we were. Their Facebook pages are both listed here. You can search for Josh and Tech Theater Educators here about the Olathe West High School Theater. He's the one who posted about their projects in the Tech Theater Educators group. So. With that, reach out if you have any information or feedback to provide, and best of luck with your shows.